Chapter 327. After Shi Shinzong descended, the atmosphere around Sword Emperor Canyon became quite lively. Hundreds of thousands of people were shaken by Shi Shinzong's boldness, and they were quite curious about how powerful he was. With their current senses, they felt that no one could defeat this sword saint. Time continued to pass. More and more people arrived. In less than 3 days, the number of cultivators present exceeded 1 million. Princess Xuanya stood on a banana leaf and looked around as she said in amazement, "So many people. And they were not ordinary people. If it was her, facing so many cultivators, she would not dare to act." Zhou Qingxin also felt quite amazed. The Sword Emperor Zhou Xuanji's rallying power was simply too great. Before, Shi Shinzong had challenged other powerful cultivators, but he did not have such a great commotion. At that moment, Yang Xindi and Great Chen's emperor walked over, surrounded by their own subordinates. Seeing them, Zhou Qingxin hurriedly got up and went to greet them. The three emperors had already formed an alliance through letters, and after Zhou Qingxin invited them into the tent, they started to chat. The topic was naturally Zhou Xuanji. 20 years have passed and Zhou Xuanji is definitely not the same as before. "Everyone, don't worry too much," Zhou Qingxin said as he lightly swirled his wine cup. Zhou Xuanji's most terrifying aspect was his talent in the way of the sword and cultivation. It had been so many years since he became the world's second, and no one could imagine how powerful he was now. However, Shi Shinzong was too godly. In the hearts of the northern wilderness people, he was synonymous with invincibility. Even if he died, he would die at their hands. Yang Xindi nodded and said, "The Sword Emperor's talent is undeniable, but he's too young. In time he will definitely surpass Shi Shinzong. If he encounters any trouble, our three empires can help him." Even though the three empires did not have top-tier experts, they had their foundations. If they all went up together, it would not be too difficult to save Zhou Xuanji. After all, the Sword Saint cared about his reputation. If he killed the most talented member of the younger generation, would he not be afraid of being condemned by others? Great Chen's emperor nodded. He did not want Zhou Xuanji to die the most. His son still needed Zhou Xuanji's guidance. The three emperors started to discuss the rescue plan. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days passed. There were more than 2 million cultivators gathered around Sword Emperor Canyon. At a glance, the ground was filled with people. There were also many mighty-looking mounts and demon pets. Most people would occasionally glance at Shi Shinzong, who was standing on the stone sword. Shi Shinzong sat there, his treasured sword resting on his legs. He waited patiently, not even batting an eyelid. Chapter 328. Clang. Shi Shinzong drew his sword. His sword was 3 fingers wide and its blade was slightly black. The 2 sides of the blade were silver and it was incredibly sharp. Many strange black words were engraved on it, giving off a heavy sense of history. As soon as this sword appeared, the temperature in the heavens and the earth fell by many degrees. A gust of cold wind swept out, causing all of the spectators to shiver. "This sword is called the Divine Way, a saint among swords," Shi Shinzong said coldly. When swordsmen fought, they naturally had to introduce their swords first. The Divine Way was ranked extremely high in the northern wilderness sword records, and it was even higher than some Sword Emperor's swords. The Hegemon Sword Emperor's Hegemon Jiao was below it. The spectating sword cultivators all looked on with desire, and some people's breathing became ragged, looking fervent. Zhou Xuanji flipped his right hand and took out Heavenly Retribution Martial Punishment as he said, "This is Heavenly Retribution Martial Punishment, a sword of the heavenly law." Following this, he flipped his left hand and took out God Ghost Howl. This sword is called God Ghost Howl, a ghost sword that can make immortals and gods howl. He continued to take out other legendary swords, which floated behind him. This sword is called Ancient God Sword. This sword is called Sky Extinguishing Sword. This sword is called Great Heavenly Dark Jade Sword. This sword is called White Dragonbone Sword. All of the legendary swords above gold grade were taken out by him. They appeared out of thin air one after another and floated behind him. Everyone fell silent and stared at him taking out legendary swords one after another. Those who admired Zhou Xuanji became incredibly excited. The Sword Emperor was so domineering. Just in terms of introducing swords, he had already surpassed Shi Shinzong. At least with these words, Zhou Xuanji sounded more imposing. After Zhou Xuanji spoke, he did not wait for Shi Shinzong to speak and directly activated Sword Master Haki. In that moment, all of the cultivators' swords in the surrounding 100 kilometers started to violently tremble. "This is my sword? What's going on? Why can't I control my sword? Could it be the Sword Emperor and the Sword Saint? 10,000 swords resonating, such a realm in the way of the sword. The cultivators exclaimed one after another. 70 to 80% of the cultivators carried a sword. Not all of them were sword cultivators, but many spells could be performed with a sword. Moreover, the sword had the air of a gentleman, so very few people would hate it. In front of me all swords bow down. If I don't become the sword sovereign, who will? Zhou Xuanji said as he proudly laughed. As he spoke, all of the cultivators' swords flew out of their sheaths and shot towards Shi Shinzong. Shi Shinzong narrowed his eyes and did not attack. This was because the swords stopped very quickly. They were dozens of meters away from him, arranged in all directions, with the tips of the swords pointed at him. Everyone was shocked. In their eyes, Shi Shinzong was surrounded by hundreds of thousands of swords. It was a majestic scene. The sect master of the Hegemon sword sect and Shi Haiming had ugly expressions on their faces. Their swords also flew out of their control. The disciples of the 10,000 Swords Divine Mountain were extremely embarrassed. Their swords were actually pointed at their ancestor. This was simply disgraceful. This kid, Bai Hao Yisan, stood up with a serious expression. If he was not wrong, this was a type of divine art. The ability to summon swords. He inexplicably thought of someone and fear flashed in his eyes. Shi Shinzong's expression became unprecedentedly serious. He looked at Zhou Xuanji and said word by word, "Zhou Xuanji, I acknowledge you as the sword sovereign. You are qualified to be my opponent." As he spoke, he swung his sword with his right hand and sword chi swept out. Hundreds of thousands of swords were sent flying back to their owners. Such a method was not inferior to Zhou Xuanji's. The cultivators all leapt up to catch the swords. They had a mental connection with their swords, so they naturally would not be mistaken. Now, everyone began to look forward to the fight. Zhou Xuanji did not seem to be any weaker than Shi Shinzong. The two of them looked at each other and leapt up at the same time. In that instant, the two stone swords that were 300 meters tall directly shattered. Seeing this, the sect master of the Hegemon sword sect felt his heart shatter. The two of them turned into sword light and shot into the sky. Woo! Waves of ghostly wails sounded throughout the sky. Zhou Xuanji directly activated Heavenly Retribution, Martial Punishment and God Ghost Wails. Facing the legendary sword saint, he did not dare to be careless. The two of them quickly clashed together, and sword light exploded like fireworks, illuminating the sky. Zhou Xuanji used dual sword wills, the sky-dominating divine sword and heavenly lights. His right hand was heavy and powerful, while his left hand was ever-changing. Facing his barrage of attacks, Shi Shinzong did not fall into a disadvantage. He easily blocked Zhou Xuanji's two swords with just one sword. His sword speed was simply too fast. It was Zhou Xuanji's first time encountering such a swift opponent. As expected of the sword saint, his reputation is well deserved. Zhou Xuanji's heart trembled as he thought to himself. He began to use his full strength. Shi Shinzong was a little shocked in his heart. He did not expect Zhou Xuanji to have such exquisite sword techniques. He used two sword techniques at the same time. They did not clash, but they were extremely compatible. Genius. Although he admired Zhou Xuanji, Shi Shinzong did not go easy on him. Such a genius was worth defeating. At this moment, Shi Shinzong suddenly sped up. A faint white light appeared on the surface of his body, and his gaze became sharper. Sword will. The Saint Path sword turned from a gale to a tempest in his hand. The sword chi was like a tsunami, sending Zhou Xuanji flying back. Shi Shinzong stayed where he was and quickly swung his sword. A blazing sun appeared behind him out of nowhere. The blazing sun expanded rapidly, and its diameter reached hundreds of meters. It was a shocking sight. A massive sword might envelop the heavens and earth, making everyone feel extremely suppressed. They even felt a sense of suffocation. Zhou Xuanji activated the Ancestor Dragon sword straightaway and transformed into a 5-clawed golden dragon. His body was 3,000 meters long and looked majestic and domineering. His entire body shone with a divine golden radiance. Shi Shinzong narrowed his eyes and slashed out. The blazing sun behind him leaped over his head and slammed into the 5-clawed golden dragon. Boom! A world-shaking explosion suddenly sounded out, causing the ears of the spectators to ring. The 5-clawed golden dragon was restrained by the blazing sun, and dragon roars could be heard continuously. The scene was so shocking that everyone was dumbfounded. This, so powerful? I think they are all qualified to become the top cultivator in the world. The Sword Emperor is so powerful. He's on par with the teacher of a great emperor, Mighty, who said that the Sword Emperor would lose. So exciting. This trip was not in vain. The cultivators were all incredibly excited and continuously cried out. The five-clawed golden dragon powerfully tore apart the blazing sun, but Shi Shinzong quickly rushed over and tore apart the five-clawed golden dragon with a single strike. Zhou Xuanji was not heavily injured. He gripped his two swords and unleashed universal attraction. Shi Shinzong felt a powerful suction force, and his body could not help but slow down. To Zhou Xuanji this was enough. He turned and unleashed 10,000 ultimate steps. Shi Shinzong flipped his hand and blocked Zhou Xuanji's 10,000 ultimate steps. Their gazes met. Their gazes were cold and sharp, and they could both see the shock in each other's eyes. They were both shocked by their respective abilities. Zhou Xuanji continued to swing his two swords. Shi Shinzong received the swords, but he was sent flying back. Following this, every time the swords clashed, he would be sent flying back, causing his face to become more and more pale. He suddenly laughed and said, "So it's like that." After saying this, he once again closed in on Zhou Xuanji. This time he did not circulate his spirit energy. Come. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 329. After Shi Shinzong saw through world reincarnation, he could rely on his physical strength and sword techniques to contend with Zhou Xuanji. Gradually he started to use different sword techniques, which were ever-changing. Zhou Xuanji could not switch sword techniques either. The two of them began to compare their sword techniques. Their bodies continuously moved about, and sword flowers flashed as all sorts of abnormal signs appeared. There were many powerful experts among the spectators, and they were completely mesmerized by this. Both of their cultivations are so powerful, they can switch between so many sword techniques so smoothly and smoothly. In other words, Zhou Xuanji is not inferior to the sword saint? It's not just strength, it's also the foundation of the way of the sword. Indeed, legends say that the sword emperor can develop a sword will from a high-grade sword technique in a day. In other words, the sword emperor is more powerful than the sword saint because he's simply too young. I support Zhou Xuanji. He killed so many great demons for the human race, and his contributions are even greater than Yangdi's. Look at Shi Shinzong. When he was alive, did he ever contribute to the human race? You might say he did, but that's the hegemon sword emperor. However, even after becoming a great emperor, he did not destroy the demon race. As they watched the battle, they discussed among themselves. Zhou Xuanji's support grew louder and louder. A legend was a legend in the end, and it was too far away from them. Zhou Xuanji was a top-tier hero in the world, who did not want to surpass their predecessors. However, many people still felt that Shi Shinzong was more powerful. Both of them have the potential to become great emperors, Bai Hao Yisin muttered to himself with a serious expression. He had seen countless geniuses, and both Zhou Xuanji and Shi Shinzong were among the top. He had seen countless geniuses, and Zhou Xuanji and Shi Shinzong were both at the top. He had seen countless geniuses, and both Zhou Xuanji and Shi Shinzong were among the top. If these two people were 90,000 years ago, it would be difficult to imagine what heights they would have reached. Clang, clang, clang. Zhou Xuanji and Shi Shinzong quickly clashed, turning into two rays of sword light that danced above the sea of clouds. This fellow is becoming more powerful. Zhou Xuanji inwardly felt quite shocked. He had used the power of two intimidating spirit legendary swords, and even though he could make up for the difference in cultivation, he could not suppress Shi Shinzong. He had underestimated Shi Shinzong. This person was truly powerful. Shi Shinzong felt even more shocked. This boy only had great realization realm level 9 cultivation, and he was able to fight evenly with him. One should know that his strength was enough to defeat a third tribulation bodiless immortal. Even Xinyuan Zhou was no match for him. This child's talent surpassed his. At that moment, Zhou Xuanji's arms shook as he unleashed sword chi soar. Countless traces of sword chi burst out from his body, forcing Shi Shinzong back. He immediately used the Emperor's Way Thousand-Hand Sword Buddha. A golden Buddha that was thousands of meters tall appeared behind him. Thousands of arms grew out from the back of the golden Buddha, each holding a giant sword. Crackle, strands of heavenly lightning coiled around the thousand-hand sword Buddha, gathering together to form a thunderbolt. Golden light illuminated the earth. The high and mighty thousand-hand sword Buddha was like an unparalleled deity overlooking the earth. Everyone was dumbfounded. What kind of divine ability was this? Shi Shinzong was also stunned. He looked up at the thousand-hand sword Buddha like an ant looking up at a mountain. This is the Emperor's Way Thousand-Hand Sword Buddha. Sword Saint, give it a try. Zhou Xuanji said with a smile. Following this, his body entered the thousand-hand sword Buddha. Sword intense state. He was the thousand-hand sword Buddha, and the thousand-hand sword Buddha was him. The thousand-hand sword Buddha opened its eyes and two beams of light shot out. Then a purple taiji symbol appeared on its forehead. A buzzing sound sounded out as if a great bell had rung. A vertical purple taiji symbol appeared behind the thousand-hand sword Buddha. It was even bigger than the thousand-hand sword Buddha, and it looked like a holy Buddha's halo, causing the thousand-hand sword Buddha's aura to become even more powerful. The Buddha in my heart does not appear in times of prosperity, but in times of chaos, to save the world from disaster. I will not use my own selfish desires to disturb a clan. In the current world there are no true Buddhas, only Buddhist cultivators who want to slay demons. They also have an undeniable responsibility for the chaos in the human race. As such, I created this sword technique to give the world a bright and peaceful world, to expel impurities and suppress evil. This is the Emperor's way, thousand-hand sword Buddha. Zhou Xuanji's voice sounded throughout the heavens and earth, as if a holy Buddha was creating all things. Everyone was shocked, and they immediately thought of Dongyuan Monastery. The conflict between the righteous and demonic sects had always been driven by Dongyuan Monastery. When the human race was in chaos, Dongyuan Monastery could not do anything. Soon they started to think about other things. On the ground there were also Dongyuan Monastery's monks. Hearing this, their faces became red. Even though they were furious, they could not help but think about it. Were they really doing the right thing? Shi Shinzong laughed. He raised the Saint Path sword, and the blazing sun once again appeared behind him. It was as tall as the thousand-hand sword Buddha. Sword Emperor, you are indeed powerful. Sword will is incredibly easy for you, but you are still a bit lacking. You should know that sword will is not the end of the way of the sword. Today I will show you what is above sword will. Shi Shinzong said as he coldly harumphed, his tone filled with pride. He was the sword saint, the saint of the way of the sword. How could he allow a junior to surpass him? As he spoke, the blazing sun behind him rippled. The thousand-hand sword Buddha narrowed its eyes and did not immediately act. Zhou Xuanji had heard the sword spirit say that there was a realm above sword will. Could it be that Shi Shinzong had already reached it? He wanted to see what it was. The 2 million spectators held their breaths, not daring to even breathe loudly. Clang. The Saint Path sword in Shi Shinzong's hand violently trembled, giving off a clear ringing that was incredibly piercing. Traces of intense flames flowed out of the Saint Path sword, looking like smoke rising up from a chimney. Soon, the intense flames reached a height of 3,000 meters and fused with the blazing sun. Shi Shinzong's entire right arm was wrapped in flames. At a glance, the blazing sun seemed to be connected to him, and his aura grew stronger and stronger. A might that surpassed a third tribulation scattered a mortal. In the distance, Fu Hao opened his eyes wide and cried out in shock, "Sword Soul!" The blazing sun on Shi Shinzong's body became more and more corporeal, and the top turned into the upper body of a human. It was incredibly majestic and domineering, and it was not inferior to the thousand-hand sword Buddha at all. Zhou Xuanji could sense that there was no sword chi in the sword soul of fiery flames. Instead, it was formed by gathering the world's spirit chi. Apart from that, there was also an indescribable power. In contrast, his thousand-hand sword Buddha was made of corporeal sword chi. Even though the two looked majestic, they were fundamentally different. Shi Shinzong raised the Saint Path sword slowly with an icy expression and said, "Sword Emperor, I hope you can withstand this sword strike." Just as he spoke, he slashed out with extreme speed. The sword soul on his body turned into a fiery long sword that disappeared in an instant. Before Zhou Xuanji could react, the thousand-hand sword Buddha was cut in half. Boom! Shi Shinzong was blasted back by his own power, and blood spurted out from his body. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared over the horizon and smashed into a tall mountain. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Silence. The heavens and earth fell silent. Zhou Xuanji levitated in the air, his hands trembling. A stream of blood flowed down from his forehead and dyed his handsome face red. He frowned. His gaze was cold, but his heart was in great shock. That sword strike. His world reincarnation could not completely block it. Come. Wonderful book house. Chapter 332. Facing Zhou Xuanji's mockery, Fu Hao was indifferent. He laughed and said, "You're right, but no matter how much the dead know, it's useless." He stomped with his right foot and charged toward Zhou Xuanji. The ancient god sword condensed the souls of 8 powerful beings, and they all attacked. Just when Fu Hao was about to touch Zhou Xuanji, he was blown away by a powerful gale. He was not injured. Instead, he smiled mockingly and said, "Zhou Xuanji, why resist? This will only increase your pain." Bang! A berserk aura exploded out from his body, and his body seemed to be covered in a layer of faint blue flames. His body blurred and appeared above Zhou Xuanji's head. His body flipped and his right leg smashed down like a whip, carrying with it a tremendous force. The souls of the 8 great cultivators used their own techniques and sent him flying again. This time, Fu Hao didn't dare to lower his guard. He narrowed his eyes as he looked at the souls of the Almighties and asked with a smile, "Are these the souls in the Tianxia map?" Zhou Xuanji did not reply. Ignorant child, he only knew about the Tianxia map. Fu Hao took a deep breath and his eyes became sharp, as if he wanted to end the battle quickly. If the sandstorm around him dissipated, he would expose himself. Zhou Xuanji's reputation leaned towards benevolence and righteousness. If it was discovered that he had killed Zhou Xuanji now, it would greatly affect Yang Di's reputation. It might even obstruct the establishment of the Great Fate Empire. He charged at Zhou Xuanji again. He split into 3 clones and attacked Zhou Xuanji from different directions. The dark green dagger was thrown out by him. Because the distance was too close, the 8 souls could not stop it in time. Puchi, the dagger stabbed into Zhou Xuanji's chest. It did not pierce through, but the blade pierced into his flesh. Zhou Xuanji's expression did not change, and he coldly harumphed as he activated world reincarnation, sending the dark green dagger flying back. Fu Hao quickly took over the dark green dagger. A vertical eye opened on his forehead and stared at Zhou Xuanji. 3 bolts of lightning shot out and turned into dragons and snakes, landing on Zhou Xuanji's body instantly. Lightning flashed, but Zhou Xuanji was not affected. He possessed the power of heavenly thunder, so how could he be hurt by lightning? Fu Hao frowned. He did not expect the heavily injured Zhou Xuanji to be so difficult to kill. Xiao. An air-piercing sound was heard. Fu Hao's scalp went numb and he jumped away subconsciously. The Saint Path sword descended from the sky and landed before Zhou Xuanji. Fu Hao looked up in shock. He had never thought that Shi Shinzong would act. He immediately turned around, burrowed into the soil and disappeared. The divine path sword rose up and disappeared in the billowing dust. Zhou Xuanji shook his head and laughed. The sword saint had quite a character. Then his eyes turned icy cold. This guy was quite strong-willed and did not beg for mercy. Zhou Xuanji laughed condescendingly. "This is the dog-culling sword." Duan Yogu's eyes widened. He was so angry that his soul almost left his body. Just when he was about to curse, Zhou Xuanji chopped off his head. Then he used the Tianxia map to absorb the soul. For cultivators of this level, it was not so easy for their souls to enter the cycle of reincarnation after they died. Perhaps there was a chance for them to revive, so Zhou Xuanji left his soul behind. It might be useful in the future. What was worth mentioning was that his cultivation did not improve much even though he had absorbed all of Duan Yogu's dermic powers. After he reached the Great Tribulation-scattered immortal realm, the magic power he needed to break through had reached an extremely terrifying level. Just thinking about it gave him a headache. Shitan Changshu stood behind Zhou Xuanji and still had not come back to his senses. The powerful and invincible Duan Yogu had been defeated so quickly. He finally understood why Zhou Xuanji could defeat the Sword Saint. Before he could unleash the famous Emperor's Wei Thousand-Hand Sword Buddha, Duan Yogu had already knelt down. Shitan Changshu smiled bitterly and thought to himself, "Your Majesty, what kind of monster did you give birth to? Don't tell me he's the reincarnation of a supreme god from the upper realm?" Zhou Xuanji turned and asked, "What should we do with these people?" When he had been fighting with Duan Yogu, he had noticed that a cultivator in a green robe had escaped. That person was also a Great Tribulation-scattered immortal, and even if Zhou Xuanji wanted to chase him, he would not be able to catch up. He was not afraid that the cultivator in a green robe would inform him. After all, it was the world epic and he was not afraid of having too many enemies. The more enemies there were, the more powerful they would be, which would help him increase his cultivation. Lock them up first and interrogate them. According to Duan Yogu, the overseas region will invade the northern wilderness region sooner or later. "We must make preparations," Shitan Changshu said, and Zhou Xuanji nodded in agreement. He turned around and activated the Sealing Dream Sword formation, sealing the spirit energy of the hundreds of cultivators. The moment the sword formation was activated, the ground shook, and Shitan Changshu was in awe. The second in the world was as powerful as an immortal god. Oh, he might already be the top cultivator in the world. Sun Hill. At the edge of a lake, Yang Di was cultivating while facing the lake. Violet Qi came from the east and surrounded his body. He frowned suddenly and stood up. He looked toward the north with rage in his eyes. "You're dead?" Yang Di mumbled to himself, clenching his fists in his sleeves. Although Fu Hao had ulterior motives, he did not really want to kill him. The two of them depended on each other.